Montana Territory, 1878. Snow blanketed the rugged landscape surrounding the Grayson Ranch, transforming the harsh terrain into something almost gentle. Almost. Mitchell Grayson knew better than most that beauty in the West was fleeting, often hiding danger beneath. At 26, he'd already weathered more loss than men twice his age, and the approaching Christmas only deepened the hollow feeling in his chest. He stood at the window of his cabin, watching as twilight settled over the snow-covered pastures. The last rays of December sun caught on his wedding band, a painful reminder of what he'd lost. Sarah had been gone nearly a year now, taken by fever after just 18 months of marriage, leaving him alone on the ranch they'd dreamed of building together. "No use dwelling," he muttered, turning away from the window. A man survived out here by looking forward, not back. The frontier had no patience for those who couldn't push through hardship. Love was a luxury most couldn't afford, especially ranchers scratching out a living in the unforgiving Montana wilderness. Better to focus on what he could control: cattle, land, and keeping himself alive through another bitter winter. The cabin, though solidly built, felt cavernous in its emptiness. He'd constructed it with a family in mind, Sarah's dream. Now its 3 rooms mocked him with their silence. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table he'd crafted himself, a cast-iron stove, and a pair of chairs before the fireplace. One bedroom remained empty, the other sparsely furnished with just his bed and trunk. Mitchell added another log to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. He'd planned nothing for Christmas beyond ensuring the cattle survived the harsh weather. The nearest town, Clearwater, was 15 miles away, and he had no reason to make the journey until supplies ran low again. Holidays meant nothing to a man alone. He ran a hand through his dark brown hair, disheveled from the day's work. Though young, fine lines had begun to form around his eyes, not from age but from squinting against the Montana sun and the weight of responsibility he'd carried since his father died when he was 17. His mother had followed 3 years later, leaving Mitchell to build this life alone until Sarah came along. At that moment, as if the very thought of companionship had conjured it, a knock sounded at his door. Mitchell frowned. Visitors were rare enough in summer, practically unheard of with snow this deep. He grabbed his Winchester from beside the door. Caution was second nature out here, and called out, "Who's there?" No answer came, just another knock, weaker this time. Rifle ready, he unlatched the door and pulled it open, letting in a gust of bitter cold air and swirling snow, and found himself staring at a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 20, her face pale beneath a woolen hood that failed to contain wisps of golden blonde hair. Her blue eyes, striking even in the fading light, were wide with fear and exhaustion. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind, "help us." Only then did Mitchell notice the bundle she clutched to her chest, a baby, wrapped tightly against the cold. Before he could respond, the woman swayed dangerously. He dropped his rifle against the doorframe and caught her arm just as her knees buckled. "Come inside," he said, helping her across the threshold. The woman stumbled forward, and he guided her to a chair by the fire. "What in God's name are you doing out in this weather with a child?" She didn't answer immediately, focused on unwrapping the baby's face from the blankets. The infant, surprisingly, wasn't crying, just blinking solemnly up at its mother. "My wagon broke an axle about 2 miles back," she finally said, her voice soft but determined. "I saw smoke from your chimney and walked here. I didn't know what else to do." Mitchell filled a cup with water and handed it to her. "Drink this, then we'll sort things out." As she sipped gratefully, he studied her more carefully. Beneath the heavy traveling cloak, she wore a simple blue dress, now damp at the hem from snow. Though travel-worn, both the dress and cloak were well made, speaking of some means. Her face, despite its current pallor, was beautiful, delicate features, a small straight nose, and those remarkable blue eyes framed by long lashes. "I'm sorry to impose," she said after drinking deeply. "I'm Victoria Gale." "This is my daughter, Emma." "Mitchell Grayson," he replied. "My ranch is the only one for miles. You're lucky you found it before nightfall." Victoria nodded, a slight shudder running through her. "The wagon has all our things. I only took what I could carry for Emma." "Where were you headed?" he asked, moving to the stove to heat more coffee. "Clearwater, I have a letter." She shifted the baby to reach into her pocket, then stopped, suddenly alarmed. "My letter." "It must have fallen when she attempted to rise, clutching the baby tighter. Mitchell raised a hand. "Stay put. Whatever it is can wait until morning. No one's going anywhere tonight." Victoria sank back into the chair, looking both relieved and apprehensive. "You're very kind, Mr. Grayson, but I don't want to impose. Perhaps if you could just point me toward town." "In this weather, with a baby, that's 15 miles, Miss Gale." He shook his head firmly. "It's nearly dark, temperature dropping by the minute. You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll retrieve your wagon and figure out the rest." For a moment defiance flashed in her eyes, then resignation. "Thank you," she said quietly, looking down at her daughter. Mitchell turned away, uncomfortable with the gratitude. The last thing he wanted was company, especially for Christmas, but he couldn't very well send a woman and baby back into the snow. He'd been raised better than that. "The spare bedroom is through there," he said, nodding toward a door. "It's not much, but it's warm. Are you hungry?" "Yes," Victoria admitted. "We haven't eaten since morning." As Mitchell busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits left from breakfast, he cast occasional glances at his unexpected guests. Victoria had relaxed somewhat, murmuring to her daughter and adjusting her tiny cap. The baby couldn't be more than a few months old, with a dusting of blonde hair matching her mother's. "Where's your husband?" he asked bluntly as he set plates on the table. Victoria's posture stiffened. "I'm a widow, Mr. Grayson." The words hit Mitchell like a physical blow. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak immediately. Of course he should have guessed from her travel alone with the child. "I apologize for your loss," he finally said. "And I for yours," she replied, gesturing toward his wedding band. "I noticed." "Recently." "Nearly a year now." He served the food, grateful for the distraction. "Fever took her last winter." Victoria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Childbirth for my Thomas." 6 months ago." Mitchell watched as she settled the baby in the crook of her arm and attempted to eat one-handed. After a moment he set down his fork. "May I?" he asked, holding out his arms. Surprise, then wariness crossed her face. "I have nieces and nephews," he explained. "I know how to hold a baby while you eat." After a moment's hesitation, Victoria carefully transferred Emma to his arms. The baby's weight was startlingly light, her tiny body warm through the blankets. She stared up at Mitchell with unfocused blue eyes, then made a small sound somewhere between a coo and a yawn. "She likes you," Victoria said, taking advantage of her free hands to eat properly. Mitchell didn't respond, transfixed by the small life in his arms. He hadn't held a baby since his sister's youngest, nearly 2 years ago. Sarah had wanted children desperately. They'd planned to start their family after getting the ranch established, but time had run out. "What brings you to Montana Territory?" he asked, pulling his thoughts from dangerous paths. "Clearwater's not exactly a destination for most folks." Victoria hesitated. "I have family there, or I hope to find them. My uncle moved to Clearwater some years ago. He owns a store, Garfield's Mercantile." Mitchell nodded slowly. "I know it. Older fellow, beard going gray, talks too much about the war." Relief washed over Victoria's face. "That's him, George Garfield. I've written, but mail's unreliable out here," Mitchell finished for her, "especially in winter." "Yes, well, after Thomas died, there wasn't much keeping me in St. Louis, I thought." She trailed off, focusing on her food. Mitchell understood the unspoken sentiment. When you've lost everything, sometimes all you can do is move. Change your surroundings if you can't change your circumstances. After supper, Mitchell showed Victoria to the spare bedroom. It was plain, just a bed, a small chest of drawers, and a chair, but clean. Sarah had made the quilt on the bed, a fact he didn't mention. "There's a wash basin there," he said, pointing. "I'll bring some hot water." "The baby, does she need anything special?" "Just milk if you have any," Victoria replied, looking exhausted now that they were indoors and fed. "Cow's milk in the cold cellar." "I'll bring some up." When he returned with the water and milk, Victoria had removed her cloak and boots and was sitting on the bed, the baby beside her. Her golden blonde hair fell in waves to the middle of her back, freed from its pins. "Thank you again, Mr. Grayson. I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need to think about that," he interrupted. "Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." Mitchell retreated to his own room, but sleep proved elusive. The presence of others in his house, in his life, however temporarily, had upset the careful balance of isolation he'd maintained since Sarah's death. The quiet he'd cultivated now felt oppressive rather than peaceful. He rose before dawn, as was his habit, and moved quietly through the cabin to avoid waking his guests. There were chores that couldn't wait, regardless of visitors, animals to feed, ice to break in the water troughs, fires to stoke. When he returned from the barn, stomping snow from his boots, he was surprised to find Victoria already up, the baby in a makeshift bed of blankets near the fire. She'd found the coffee pot and had breakfast started. "You didn't need to do that," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "I'm not one to sit idle while others work, Mr. Grayson," she replied, her tone matter of fact. "Especially when I'm imposing on your hospitality." "Mitchell," he corrected, "if you're cooking in my kitchen, you might as well use my name." A small smile touched her lips. "Mitchell, then." "And I'm Victoria." After breakfast, Mitchell hitched his horses to a sled. "I'll find your wagon, see what can be salvaged," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "Best you and the baby stay here where it's warm." Victoria looked like she might argue, but nodded. "The axle broke just after a bend in the road. You'll see where the snow's disturbed." Mitchell found the wagon exactly where she described, listing heavily to one side, the right rear wheel lying uselessly nearby. Her belongings, 2 trunks, several bags, and a crate, were still secured in the back, untouched. Either she'd been lucky, or this stretch of road saw little traffic in winter. The axle was indeed broken, but not beyond repair. With the right tools and some time, he could fix it. For now, though, he loaded her possessions onto his sled, covering them with a tarpaulin against the snow that had begun falling again. When he returned, he found Victoria sitting by the fire, nursing the baby beneath a light blanket. She looked up, startled, and he turned away quickly to give her privacy. "Your things are safe," he said, busying himself hanging up his coat. "The wagon needs work, but I can fix it. Might take a few days with this weather." "A few days," there was a note of alarm in Victoria's voice. "But Christmas is in 3 days. I'd hoped to reach my uncle by then." Mitchell shrugged. "Can't control the weather, ma'am. Storms rolling in. Even if the wagon was fixed, the roads will likely be impassable by tomorrow." Victoria was silent for a moment. "I understand," she finally said, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm grateful for your help, truly, it's just—" "Your first Christmas without your husband," Mitchell finished, "and you wanted to be with family." "I understand." Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, a shared understanding of loss that needed no further explanation. "I'll bring in your trunks," he said, breaking the moment. "You'll want your own things." By evening, Victoria had transformed the spare bedroom with small touches from her belongings: a lace doily on the chest of drawers, a silver-backed hairbrush, a small framed photograph of a man Mitchell assumed was her late husband. Emma lay in a proper cradle Victoria had somehow fit into the wagon for their journey. They settled into an uneasy rhythm over the next day. Mitchell went about his ranch duties, returning to find Victoria keeping the cabin in order, meals prepared. They spoke little, but the silence was not entirely uncomfortable. On the second night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Emma asleep in her cradle, Victoria broke the quiet. "You must find this terribly disruptive, having us here." Mitchell looked up from the bridle he was mending. "It's different," he admitted. "Been on my own a while now." "After my husband died," she said softly, "everyone was kind, too kind. They all wanted to help, to visit, to bring food. I couldn't breathe sometimes, surrounded by so much concern." Mitchell nodded. "People mean well." "They do. But sometimes what you need most is just space to figure out who you are now that everything's changed." "And did you," he asked, "figure it out?" Victoria smiled sadly. "Not entirely. That's part of why I left. Everyone in St. Louis saw me as Thomas's widow, poor Mrs. Gale with the new baby and no husband. I thought perhaps somewhere new, I could just be Victoria again." Mitchell understood that feeling all too well. In Clearwater, he was still that poor Grayson boy to many, first orphaned, then widowed before 30. "Your uncle," Mitchell said, changing the subject. "He's a good man, honest, treats people fair." Victoria's expression brightened. "That's a relief to hear. We weren't close. He's my mother's brother, but he always sent gifts at Christmas when I was a child. He was the only one who responded to my letters after Thomas died." "What did he say about you coming here?" She hesitated. "He doesn't exactly know. I wrote that I was considering it, but with the mail being what it is, I didn't want to wait months for his reply." "Bold move," Mitchell commented, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Coming all this way on your own, with a baby." Bold or foolish, she replied with a self-deprecating smile. I'm still deciding which. The following day brought clear skies but bitter cold. Mitchell spent the morning in his workshop beside the barn, working on the wagon axle he'd retrieved. By midday, he was satisfied with the repair, but knew the snow was still too deep to attempt the journey to town. When he entered the cabin, he found Victoria at the table, surrounded by flour and dough. "What's all this?" he asked, warming his hands by the fire. "Christmas cookies," she replied, not looking up from her work. "It's Christmas Eve tomorrow, I thought. Well, we might as well make the best of things." Mitchell watched as she expertly rolled out dough and cut shapes with a knife, stars and simple trees. The domesticity of the scene made his chest ache with memories of Sarah baking in the same kitchen last Christmas, unaware it would be her last. "I hope you don't mind," Victoria added, glancing up. "I found the molasses in your pantry." "I don't mind," he said, his voice gruff. He cleared his throat. "Need any help?" Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a genuine smile that transformed her features. "Actually, yes." "Could you cut these while I prepare the next batch?" Mitchell sat across from her, awkwardly taking the knife she offered. His hands, calloused from ranch work, felt too large for the delicate task, but he did his best to follow the pattern she'd started. "My mother always said Christmas isn't about where you are, but who you're with," Victoria said as she mixed another bowl of dough. Mitchell concentrated on cutting a somewhat lopsided star. "Sounds like something my mother would have said too." "Is she?" "Died when I was 20, father 3 years before that." Victoria nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My parents are both gone as well. Mother when I was 16, father 2 years ago. That's why Uncle George is so important. He's the only family I have left. Well, he and Emma now." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and Emma's occasional coos from her cradle near the stove. "I haven't celebrated Christmas since Sarah died," Mitchell admitted suddenly. Didn't see the point. Victoria's hands stilled in the dough. "And now, with unexpected guests forcing festivities upon you." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "It's not entirely unwelcome." That evening, the cookies cooling on the table filled the cabin with a sweet, homey scent that stirred memories Mitchell had tried to suppress. After Victoria retired to her room with Emma, he found himself retrieving a small box from the bottom of his trunk, decorations Sarah had made for their first and only Christmas together. On Christmas Eve morning, Victoria emerged from her room to find the cabin transformed. A small pine branch stood on the table, decorated with wooden ornaments and bits of red yarn. Sprigs of evergreen adorned the mantel, and a pair of candles waited to be lit. Mitchell stood awkwardly by the stove, clearly uncertain of her reaction. "Thought the little one might like some Christmas cheer," he said, not meeting her eyes. Victoria blinked back sudden tears. "It's lovely," she said softly, "truly." Outside, the snow had stopped, but drifts piled high against the cabin walls. They spent the day in quiet preparations, Mitchell bringing in extra firewood and checking on the animals, Victoria preparing what festive fare she could manage with the ranch's provisions. By evening, the simple cabin glowed with warmth and light. They ate supper by candlelight, and Victoria sang soft Christmas carols as she rocked Emma to sleep. Mitchell listened, transfixed by the gentle scene before him. It had been so long since his home had felt like this, alive, warm, filled with something beyond mere existence. After Emma was settled, Victoria joined Mitchell by the fire. "Thank you," she said, "for making this a real Christmas for us." Mitchell shook his head. "I should be thanking you. I'd have spent tomorrow like any other day if you hadn't shown up on my doorstep." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. Victoria looked away first, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I have something for you," Mitchell said, reaching beside his chair. He handed her a small, crudely wrapped package. "It's not much." Victoria unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small wooden horse, exquisitely carved. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger along the smooth lines. "For Emma," he explained, "when she's older, every child needs a toy horse in ranch country." "I don't have anything for you," Victoria said, looking distressed. Mitchell shook his head. "You've brought life back to this place for a few days." "That's gift enough." Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Mitchell rose early, as always, to tend to his chores before Victoria and Emma woke. When he returned, stomping snow from his boots, he found Victoria waiting with coffee and breakfast. "Merry Christmas, Mitchell," she said, a tentative smile on her face. "Merry Christmas," he replied, surprised at how natural the words felt after so long. They spent the day in simple celebration. Victoria had somehow managed to bake a small cake with dried apples and cinnamon, and Mitchell contributed his last jar of preserved peaches to the feast. They shared stories of Christmases past, carefully skirting the most painful memories of their lost spouses. As twilight fell, Mitchell stood at the window, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. "Roads should be passable tomorrow or the next day," he said. "I'll have the wagon fixed by then." Victoria joined him at the window, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Thank you for everything." Mitchell turned to look at her, struck again by her beauty in the fading light. Golden hair loose around her shoulders, blue eyes reflecting the firelight, cheeks flushed with warmth. She looked like she belonged here, in this moment, in his home. The thought startled him. 3 days ago, he'd been determined to spend Christmas alone, convinced that solitude was his only option after Sarah. Now, the prospect of returning to that emptiness felt unbearable. "You could stay longer," he said abruptly, "if you wanted, at least until after New Year's. The roads are treacherous this time of year." Victoria's eyes widened in surprise. "I wouldn't want to impose further." "It's not an imposition," Mitchell said, finding truth in the words as he spoke them. "It's been good having you and Emma here." A complicated emotion crossed Victoria's face, hope mingled with hesitation. "Are you certain?" "I am," he replied simply. The next morning, Mitchell hitched his team to the sleigh rather than the wagon. "We should let your uncle know you're safe," he explained as he helped Victoria and Emma into the sleigh, tucking thick buffalo robes around them against the cold. "We'll come back for the wagon and your things later." The journey to Clearwater took longer than usual with the snow-covered roads, but the day was bright and clear. Victoria held Emma close beneath the robes, her face alight with excitement at finally reaching their destination. Clearwater was quiet but festive, wreaths adorning many doors, smoke rising from every chimney against the cold. Mitchell guided the sleigh down the main street toward Garfield's Mercantile, a 2-story building with the store below and living quarters above. George Garfield was sweeping snow from his front step when they arrived. He looked up at the sound of the sleigh bells, his weathered face registering first curiosity, then utter shock as he recognized his passenger. "Victoria," he called, dropping his broom. "Good heavens, is that really you?" "Uncle George," Victoria's voice trembled with emotion as Mitchell helped her down from the sleigh, careful of the baby in her arms. The older man rushed forward, embracing his niece awkwardly around the baby bundle. "My dear girl, what on earth are you doing here, and with a child?" "It's a long story," Victoria said, tears of relief and happiness on her cheeks. "This is Emma, my daughter, and this is Mitchell Grayson. He's been our salvation these past days." George turned to Mitchell, recognition dawning. "Grayson, from the ranch north of here. You're looking well, son." Mitchell nodded, suddenly feeling out of place in the family reunion. "Miss Gale's wagon broke down near my property during the storm. She and the little one have been staying with me until the roads cleared." "Thank God she found you," George said fervently. "Come in, both of you." "Martha," he called toward the store's interior. "Martha, come see who's here." A plump, pleasant-faced woman appeared in the doorway, her expression changing from curiosity to delight when she saw Victoria. More introductions and explanations followed as they were ushered inside to the warmth of the store. Mitchell hung back, watching as Victoria was embraced by her uncle's wife. The baby passed between them with exclamations of wonder. This was what Victoria had journeyed so far for: family, belonging, a place where her past was known and her future supported. He felt a pang of something like envy, quickly suppressed. "Mitchell, you'll stay for dinner," George insisted when the initial excitement had settled. "It's the least we can do after you've taken such good care of our girl." Mitchell hesitated. "I should get back to the ranch. Animals need tending." Victoria turned to him, a question in her eyes that her words didn't express. "Surely they can wait a few hours more." He found he couldn't refuse her. "I suppose they can." Dinner at the Garfields was a boisterous affair, with George peppering Victoria with questions about her journey and Mitchell with inquiries about ranch conditions and cattle prices. Martha fussed over Emma, clearly delighted to have an infant in the house. "You'll stay with us, of course," George told Victoria. "We have plenty of room upstairs. I always hoped you might visit someday, though I never expected such a permanent arrangement." Victoria glanced at Mitchell before answering. Actually, my things are still at Mitchell's ranch. My wagon broke an axle. I've fixed it, Mitchell said. I can bring it and your belongings tomorrow if the weather holds. George clapped him on the shoulder. Excellent, problem solved. Victoria and Emma will move in tomorrow, and you, young man, must join us for New Year's dinner to properly thank you. Mitchell nodded noncommittally, unable to articulate the hollow feeling spreading through his chest at the thought of Victoria and Emma leaving his home for good. It was what she had planned all along, he reminded himself. These past days had been an unexpected detour, nothing more. After dinner, as George showed Mitchell his new shipment of farm implements, Victoria approached, Emma sleeping against her shoulder. I never properly thanked you, she said quietly, for taking us in, for making Christmas special despite the circumstances. Mitchell shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Victoria said firmly. Not anyone. You opened your home when you clearly preferred solitude. You shared your Christmas when you planned to ignore it entirely. You were kind when you had every reason to be bitter. He looked at her then, really looked at her, the woman who had disrupted his carefully constructed isolation and somehow made him grateful for it. Will you be happy here? He asked. Victoria glanced toward her uncle and his wife, who were now cooing over the baby. I think so, they seem wonderful, and Emma will have family stability. Good, Mitchell said, though the word felt hollow. That's good. The ride back to his ranch was solitary and silent. The cabin, when he entered it, felt colder and emptier than ever before, despite the fire he quickly built. Signs of Victoria and Emma remained everywhere, the cradle still beside the stove, a shawl forgotten on a chair, the faint scent of baby powder in the spare room. Mitchell slept poorly that night, his dreams filled with images of Victoria's smile, the weight of Emma in his arms. He woke before dawn, restless and conflicted, and threw himself into his chores with unusual intensity. By midday, he had hitched Victoria's repaired wagon to his team and loaded her trunks and belongings. The evidence of her brief presence in his life was nearly erased, save for the Christmas greenery still adorning his mantle and the lingering scent of the cookies they'd baked together. In town, he found Victoria helping Martha in the store, Emma sleeping in a basket behind the counter. Victoria's face lit up when she saw him, then fell slightly as she registered the wagon outside. You've brought my things, she said, stating the obvious. Mitchell nodded. All loaded up. Where do you want them? George appeared from the storeroom. Around back is best. There's a staircase up to the living quarters. Mitchell began unloading the wagon, carrying Victoria's trunks up the narrow stairs to a pleasant room that Martha had prepared. Victoria followed with smaller items, both of them working in a strained silence. As he set down the last trunk, Mitchell straightened, finding himself alone with Victoria in what would be her new home. Well, he said awkwardly, that's everything. Victoria nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. Thank you again. I don't know how I can ever repay you. No need, Mitchell said, turning to go. At the door, he paused. Take care of yourself, Victoria and Emma. Mitchell, she called as he reached the stairs. He turned back. Will you come for New Year's dinner, as Uncle George asked? He wanted to refuse, to protect himself from prolonging the strange pain of attachment and loss. But looking at her standing there, hopeful and uncertain, he couldn't bring himself to say no. I'll try, he said instead, and left before he could say more. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of work and solitude for Mitchell. He threw himself into ranch tasks, exhausting himself physically to avoid thinking about Victoria and Emma in town, building their new life without him. On New Year's Eve, he stood in his cabin, debating whether to honor his promise to attend dinner at the Garfields. Part of him argued it would be easier to send his regrets, to begin the process of forgetting. But another part, growing stronger by the day, urged him toward town, toward Victoria. He arrived at the Garfields as the church bell was ringing 5 o'clock. The store was closed for the holiday, but lights glowed warmly in the upstairs windows. Martha welcomed him effusively, taking his coat and ushering him into their comfortable sitting room where George was entertaining several other guests from town. Mitchell scanned the room automatically, his heart sinking when he didn't see Victoria. Had she changed her mind about wanting him here? She's just putting Emma down for a nap, Martha whispered, correctly interpreting his search. She'll be down shortly. True to her word, Victoria appeared moments later, descending the stairs in a dark green dress that complemented her golden hair and brought out the blue of her eyes. She moved through the room with quiet grace, greeting guests until she reached Mitchell. "You came," she said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "I said I would," he replied simply. Dinner was a lively affair, with George telling elaborate stories about his days as a Union soldier and Martha urging second helpings on everyone. Mitchell found himself seated beside Victoria, acutely aware of her presence throughout the meal, the brush of her sleeve against his arm, the scent of lavender in her hair, the musical quality of her laugh when George said something amusing. After dinner, as they awaited the midnight hour, Victoria drew Mitchell aside. "Would you like to see Emma? She's sleeping, but—" He nodded, following her up the stairs to a small room adjoining Victoria's. The baby lay in a cradle, peaceful in sleep, one tiny hand curled beside her cheek. "She's growing already," Mitchell observed softly. Victoria smiled. "Babies do that. Uncle George has been wonderful. He's already talking about building her a proper bed when she outgrows the cradle." "You've found your home, then," Mitchell said, the words more statement than question. Victoria hesitated. "Uncle George and Martha have been incredibly welcoming. The room is lovely, and they adore Emma." "But," Mitchell prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation in her voice. She sighed. "It's not quite what I expected. Living above a store in town is very different from what I'm used to, and while I'm grateful for their kindness, I feel confined, like I've traded one version of being looked after for another." "What did you hope for when you came west?" Mitchell asked. Victoria turned to look out the small window, where snow was beginning to fall again in the darkness. "Space to breathe, a chance to make my own decisions, to build something for Emma and myself, not just exist in someone else's life." "Like your own ranch," the question slipped out before Mitchell could consider its implications. She turned to him, surprise in her eyes. "I hadn't thought specifically of a ranch, but yes, something like that, a place that's truly ours." The church bell began to toll midnight before Mitchell could respond. From downstairs came cheers and calls of Happy New Year, but neither of them moved to rejoin the party. "Victoria," Mitchell said, his voice low and serious, "I have a proposition for you." She raised an eyebrow, waiting. "My ranch is too big for one person. I built it for a family, for a future I thought was lost when Sarah died." The words came faster now, as though he feared losing his courage. "You want independence, a fresh start. I can offer that. A partnership to start. You and Emma would have your own space, your own stake in the ranch. In time, perhaps." He trailed off, uncertain how to express the feelings taking root in his heart. Victoria's eyes widened. "Mitchell, are you asking me to marry you?" "No," he said quickly, then amended, "not yet. I'm asking you to consider a business arrangement that could become more if we both wished it. I know it's sudden, but these past days with you and Emma in my home, it felt right in a way nothing has since Sarah died." Victoria was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Mitchell's heart hammered in his chest as he waited for her response, aware he might have ruined everything with his impulsive offer. "My husband died believing I couldn't manage on my own," she finally said. "He left everything to his brother to oversee until Emma comes of age. That's partly why I left St. Louis, to prove I could make my own way." Mitchell nodded, a sinking feeling in his stomach. "I understand. Forget I mentioned it." "No," Victoria said, reaching out to touch his arm. "You don't understand. I'm not refusing. I'm explaining why your offer means so much. You're not offering charity or protection. You're offering partnership." "Equality." Hope flared in Mitchell's chest. "Is that a yes?" "It's all I need to think about it," Victoria replied, but her smile softened the words. "This isn't just my future, but Emma's too, and yours." "We should be certain." "Of course," Mitchell agreed quickly. "Take all the time you need." They rejoined the party downstairs, where George was leading a rousing rendition of Auld Lang Syne. If anyone noticed the new awareness between Victoria and Mitchell, they didn't comment. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Mitchell prepared to return to his ranch. Victoria walked him to the door while the others cleaned up in the kitchen. "I meant what I said upstairs," Mitchell told her quietly. "No pressure, but the offer stands, for both of you." Victoria nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll have an answer for you soon." 3 days later, Mitchell was repairing a fence damaged by ice when he heard sleigh bells approaching. He looked up to see George Garfield's sleigh coming up the road, Victoria at the reins, a determined expression on her face. His heart leapt into his throat as he dropped his tools and walked to meet her. Victoria drew the sleigh to a halt and set the brake before climbing down, a bundle that could only be Emma secured to her chest in a sling. Victoria, Mitchell greeted her, uncertain what her presence meant. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, she assured him. I told Uncle George I needed to borrow his sleigh to speak with you privately. Mitchell waited, hardly daring to breathe. I've been thinking about your offer, Victoria continued, about partnership, independence, building something together. She took a deep breath. I'd like to accept with one condition. Name it, Mitchell said immediately. I want it clear from the beginning that this is truly a partnership. I bring my inheritance from Thomas. It's not much, but it's something. I want my name on the deed alongside yours. I want to learn every aspect of running the ranch, not just keep house. Mitchell nodded, a smile beginning to form. Done. Anything else? Victoria stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. Yes, I want honesty between us. We've both loved and lost. Those people will always be part of us. But if we're to build something new together, we need to be open about our feelings, past and present. I can do that, Mitchell said softly, starting now. These past weeks without you and Emma have been empty in a way I never expected. I didn't realize how much I needed you both until you were gone. Victoria's face softened. Emma and I have missed you too. More than makes sense after knowing you such a short time. Mitchell reached out tentatively, taking her gloved hand in his. Is that your only condition, partnership and honesty? One more, Victoria said, a hint of mischief in her eyes. When the time comes, and I'm not saying it will be soon, but when we're both ready, I want a proper courtship, not just a practical arrangement. Mitchell laughed, the sound surprising both of them. I think I can manage that. Then we have a deal, Mr. Grayson, Victoria said, her smile radiant against the winter landscape. We have a deal, Miss Gale. He gestured toward the cabin. Shall we go home? I believe there's still some Christmas greenery that needs taking down. Actually, Victoria said as they walked toward the cabin, Emma sleeping peacefully between them, I was thinking we might leave it up a while longer. It feels like a new beginning, deserves some celebration. Mitchell looked down at the woman beside him and the baby she carried, his unexpected Christmas visitors who had somehow become his future. I believe you're right, he said. A new beginning indeed. As they reached the porch, he held the door open for her, and Victoria stepped inside with Emma, bringing light and life back into the cabin that had stood empty for too long. Mitchell followed, closing the door against the winter chill, certain for the first time in a long year that spring would come again, to the land and to his heart.